Hiya. So I am finally done with the Brothers Karamazov, which means it is finally time for me to make a video talking about recent reads and watches that I recommend. Just kind of going over them is what this video is going to be. If you follow me on Goodreads or Letterboxd and you see that there are some books or films that I did read recently that I'm like not getting to in this video, it just means they were okay. It doesn't mean that they were like terrible necessarily, but I think for these like wrap-up videos, I kind of like prefer to talk about books that and movies that I actually like really have strong feelings about and very much want to implore you to give your attention. If there are books that or films that I consumed since the Memoirs of Cleopatra video that you like really strongly want to know my thoughts on, if I like wasn't extensive enough on Goodreads or Letterboxd, then leave me a comment down below and feel free to ask me about them. I hope you will give some of these a try. We'll do books first and then we'll do films. The first book that I want to talk about is America's Last Wild Horses by Hope Ryden. So I've talked about Hope Ryden on this channel a number of times before. She does animal nonfiction, but her writing is just phenomenal. And the animals that she talks about are specifically animals that are like maybe a little bit more common on the North American continent. And I appreciate it for that reason, because I feel like there are tons of people who will write about tigers or rhinos or whatever, but she writes about animals that I feel like other people don't write about. Like she has a book on coyotes. Her book, Lily Pond, on beavers, I have recommended on this channel a million times before. It is one of my favorite things I've ever read, and it's basically about her following the life of a family of beavers for several years. So I highly recommend that. This one, I recommend with like an asterisk that is kind of just clarifying that it is quite a bit different from Lily Pond. So this is a lot more of an activist book. It is more about activism to protect wild horses and the history of the wild horse in America than it is about like the animal itself and like the social life of the animal. So for that reason, I enjoyed this, I would say, considerably less than Lily Pond. There also are really graphic depictions of animal abuse and animal death and animal cruelty in this. So if you are not ready to read that sort of thing, then just like maybe wait to read it. I do know that this book, was the subject of a front page article in the New York Times when it was first published, and the author, Ryden, did help to ensure the passage of an act in American law called the Wild and Free Roaming Horse and Burro Act, which, if you don't know, horses and burros are technically considered feral animals, not like native species, because like the degree of their nativeness to the continent is really highly contested. There is some evidence that she talks about in this of the wild horse in America potentially predating settlers bringing them over to the continent, but it's iffy. There like needs to be more research on it. But because we cannot confirm that historical nativeness, it makes it so that before this act was passed, it was basically impossible to protect wild horses and burros from just indiscriminate torture and slaughter. And so a lot of people would follow them around with cars and planes and, you know, just basically grab free fodder to send off to the dog food canneries and the glue factories. So really messed up stuff. I also learned some really interesting stuff, and you can see there are just gorgeous color pictures in this of horses. It's another very cute one. Some more here. I did learn from this not only about that difficulty protecting them, but also about the fact that that difficulty still continues today despite the law. And it really is, like, honestly, it is a little bit hard to read. It is truly the Wild West out there. When you read this book, you will understand what I mean when I say that if somebody tells you they hate an organization abbreviated BLM, they are either a racist or they hate the Bureau of Land Management, which I don't know if any of my peanut gallery out there is interested in buying a government organization, but apparently it's fucking up for sale and it always has been. You learn a lot about the really insane corruption in that organization in this book. I also learned some kind of pretty disappointing stuff that deconstructed some of my beliefs I had about hunting and fishing being good for the environment. He kind of breaks down like why the like concept of, oh, humans have to, you know, hunt deer because otherwise the population wouldn't be managed. She basically breaks down why that doesn't make sense and talks about how, well, if humans didn't reduce the natural predator populations, which they often do artificially, then there wouldn't be a necessity of people going out and killing a bunch of deer because there wouldn't be the problem of overpopulation. And she also talks about how people's conception of like an overpopulation of animals is really not quite accurate. I think one of my favorite facts that I learned about in this was that like middle America, when it was like the prairie, before we destroyed the prairie, which now we basically have no hope of bringing it back, the prairies of America apparently used to be able to support literally millions and millions of bison, elk or wapiti, and wild horses. Basically, things like the Dust Bowl started happening because people started farming on that land, and people are always like, oh, protect our farmers, blah, blah, blah. But the problem with farming that land is that by its nature, like a farm is only like an enclosed amount of space. When wild horses and like grazers like bison and wapiti and all of those, when those are like naturally in the prairies, they naturally move on to new spaces when the vegetation is starting to get depleted, because they are not enclosed within a property because they are wild animals. However, when a farmer is grazing his cattle, even if he moves them around his property, they are still moving within a finite amount of space, which means the land becomes over depleted, which leads to dust coming up and into the air. So farming is really like, this makes it seem like it's just a terrible match for that environment. And honestly, you know, when I was reading this, I kept thinking like, maybe we need like a Great Plains National Park in America, honestly. Like, I think that that would do good to break up the farmland and frankly give these animals some place to go, because they are also good for the environment, like the bison and like the elk. Also, very fun to read about Native American horse stealing culture in this, which also was a very big thing and also contributed to the giant bands of wild horses that were running around places. Yeah, she even like breaks it down on the level of like how different tribes approached it. So lots of like interesting indigenous history stuff in here as well. I can't remember if I showed you this picture already, but that's probably my favorite. So if you're interested in kind of like legal history in approaching an animal, that is for you. I actually can't remember if I put the B-roll on this channel, but I did see wild horses for the first time in my adult life this previous summer. So if I can dig it up, I will insert a clip of them here. They are amazing, amazing animals. Next, I'm gonna talk a little bit about Emperor of Rome by Mary Beard. So this, I do still recommend this. This is basically about what it was actually like to be Emperor of Rome. At least that is what it is sold as, and what I believe Mary Beard was trying to write it as. I know that Mary Beard is like kind of above criticism these days, but I confess I agree with other reviewers on Goodreads who said that this was a little bit confused, and I need to be like really careful when I'm describing why I started to find it frustrating, because I don't want people to misconstrue it. But like, this book is supposed to be, as I told you, about what it is like to be Emperor of Rome. So, you know, what happens when you need to go to the doctor? How much paperwork are you dealing with? How do you approach the throne? You know, all of that good stuff. I found that Beard, to a degree that started to become annoying, kept diverging from talking about that topic to instead talking very extensively about people who were not Emperor of Rome. Specifically, she just goes on and on and on about slavery in ancient Rome, which, if you don't know anything about slavery in ancient Rome, it was, first of all, very different from slavery in the United States, but that didn't mean that it was better, and a lot of people like try to pretend that it was better to be owned in ancient Rome than to be owned in the United States. I'm not so sure about that. The scale of it was absolutely massive, and it ran on slavery. Rome could not have existed without it. So I understand wanting to make your reader aware of that, but like, the degree to which she kept circling back to it, and she would be talking on like one train of thought and then immediately be like, but what's really interesting is thinking about how you couldn't have an imperial banquet without all these slaves. And it's like, yes, I get it. It felt like she was just regularly just like saging the place, like burning sage, trying to make sure that no modern autocrat would pick up this book and enjoy it. But defensiveness like that, I think, is a really hindering way to approach a book. And yeah, I found it really frustrating. I kept asking myself, like, why did she not just put something in the introduction? I mean, she talks about Rome is an autocracy, and I've grown an intense distaste for all forms of autocracy in studying it. Like, that would be a perfect place to insert something about how the life of the Emperor of Rome could not have been the life of the Emperor of Rome without unpaid slave labor. And I think it would be fine to like mention it like here and there throughout the text even. It's just the diversions were frequent and extensive enough that I kept being like, why are you punishing me as the reader for picking this up? Why, if you really wanted to write about injustice in ancient Rome, then why would you not just write about injustice? Because I picked this up because, yes, indeed, I do want to hear about Commodus's tonsillitis and what medicine he would have taken for it. And that was another thing that bugged me about this, is that like, there were so many places where there could have been actual elaboration based off of fact. Like, you know, she could have said what Commodus would have taken for his tonsillitis, or like, you know, given more, like used more historical context to give us more information about, you know, some of the finer details of this. Massive deficiencies in like the food section, for example, because she spends so long harping on and on about the bondage that we get no information about what the emperor's daily meals look like. And that is something that I'm pretty sure someone of this level of expertise like could have made an educated guess about. So much of this book, I do appreciate her speculation and her like kind of showing us her stream of consciousness of speculation, because I think it does teach you, like it models for me how I need to be asking questions in my own research. And I think she is very good at asking questions. Is she good at positing answers to those questions? Not so much, I don't think. I get tired of an endless, oh, but I wonder what it was like. I wonder what blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you're the expert. Can you not posit a hypothesis of what you think these things would have been like? Maybe I was expecting something more academic. I think this is really just for like random people who don't know anything about Rome to begin with. And so if you literally know nothing about Rome and you want just like a very baseline, basic level thing, then this may be enjoyable for you. But I don't know, as someone that doesn't know like nothing about Rome, I found it really, really frustrating. Don't tell me we have tons of information about like emperor's medical ailments and then not give me the details of those ailments. I think she felt like too guilty to really write this book successfully. Don't write a book about the Emperor of Rome if you're so disgusted by autocracy, which there's nothing wrong with that. She's right to be disgusted by autocracy. But if you are this defensive about it and you are so paranoid about a single Nazi reading your book and, I don't know, liking it, like even as someone who literally agrees with you politically, that's annoying to do that. I do recommend it. It's not like, I think many will enjoy this. I don't think people are wrong for enjoying it. It's just, I found this aggravating a little bit to read. Okay, and then the last book that I want to talk about before I talk about 3-ish movies, The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, which I just recently finished rereading for the second time and for the first time in 10 years. This book really kind of, I feel like changed the trajectory of my life a little bit, because I don't know, if you don't know, this is basically Dostoevsky's kind of like argument against atheism, but it's more complicated than that. Like, it's not just Christian proselytizing. It is easy to perceive this as that, but it's not. It is, if you don't know, the story of a man, one of 3 brothers, who gets falsely accused of murder. And it just kind of, it follows the lead up to the night the murder occurs, and then it follows the trial, and then it cuts off there. And I'm also, by the way, for when I talk about this, I actually am going to include spoilers, but just because I think that having spoilers might actually help your enjoyment of this book if you choose to pick it up. Because if you don't know where it's going, it's actually really hard to get anything out of the majority of the book. And even when I was rereading, knowing what was gonna happen, I was rusty on it, and so I didn't like get it until the very end. And then I realized how amazing it was and why I had loved it so much the first time. So I am going to be including spoilers. If you're really, really against spoilers, then like click away now. But I think that spoilers will actually benefit you if you've never read this before. But yeah, so there are 3 + 1 lost Karamazov brother. Basically it follows Mitya, or Dimitri's, the oldest brother. It follows the lead up to the night that he supposedly murders Fyodor Karamazov, or his father. And then it goes through Mitya's trial, and then Mitya's condemnation to go be sent to prison in Siberia. Now, Dostoevsky was planning to write a sequel to this, and I actually felt that a lot more on this read than I did on the first one. And I maybe felt a little bit more frustrated by the fact that that sequel is never going to exist, because he died very shortly after finishing this. And presumably that sequel was going to follow what is promised at the end of this book, which is the other 2 brothers, with the help of Mitya's love interest and estranged love interest, breaking him out of prison in Siberia. So I think the sequel was probably going to be extremely action-packed, but I guess we'll never know. This is not an action-packed book at all. I felt that when I was rereading this, I feel like I was taking a much less literary approach to it this time. Obviously, because I was reading it for school the first time, I had to do that the first time around. But it did, like, change my life, because I grew up in a very like militant atheist household, even though like I didn't quite vibe with that. And it was not for terrible reasons. Like my mother was like trying to protect me because she had been burned by religion very badly. But I definitely inherited the spiritual religious gene from my grandmother. Like I've always felt very instinctively connected to that. And so reading this, I saw like just new possibilities for the first time, and new ways of understanding life that, you know, my parents had never presented to me, and frankly that nobody had ever presented to me so far. There is something so like comforting about the morality of this, I guess. I don't know. There were so many passages where you're reading it and you just feel like somebody actually gets it. People really enjoy, like certain people really enjoy being offended, and it like sounds like you're using like current internet buzzwords, but like at the very core of it is like the idea that some people like actively seek out that kind of like suffering. And Dostoevsky does suggest that suffering is not terrible, that like suffering in some ways actually brings joy. But I think the key is like people who are like thirsty for suffering, and who specifically like cannot wait to be wronged by other people because it enables their own antisocial tendencies. And there's also another fantastic passage somewhere here about isolation, and about people, just about like isolation, and about people isolating themselves with their wealth away from other people, and thinking that like this is like the wise way to live your life, or that this is the way you like win at life somehow, is to be completely isolated in your pod with your wealth and your material possessions, just accruing more and more stuff while you are a wretch because you're not connected to other people. I think what really, really struck me above all else in this was actually the trial scene, because when I first read this novel for school, we actually skipped the trial scene. Yes, here we go. I actually found the quote. We actually skipped the trial scene, and so I was just not privy to anything that happened during the trial beyond what my teacher summarized for us. I feel like when I reached the trial scene on my reread is the minute where I was like, I need to reread the whole thing all over again, because like I wasn't tuned in enough, and like that was the moment where it clicked for me, and suddenly I understood everything Dostoevsky was doing. But the trial scene, it has this passage that completely transformed the meaning of the novel for me, and it's when Mitya's defense lawyer is talking about Fyodor and the murder, and he says this. This is page 744. Such a father as the murdered old Karamazov cannot and does not deserve to be called a father. Love for a father that is not justified by the father is an absurdity, an impossibility. Love cannot be created out of nothing. Only God creates out of nothing. To all fathers I cry out, fathers, provoke not your children. Let us first fulfill Christ's commandment ourselves, only then let us expect the same of our children. And he gives like a bunch of examples. And then he says, why should I love him just because he begot me and then never loved me all my life? Let the son stand before his father and ask him reasonably, Father, tell me, why should I love you? Father, prove to me that I should love you. And if the father can, if he is able to answer and give him proof, then we have a real normal family, established not just on mythical prejudice, but on reasonable, self-accountable, and strictly humane foundations. It's like kind of an attack on the idea of like you should respect your family no matter what. And his approach to the defense is, even if Mitya did kill Fyodor Karamazov, you have to consider the context in which that occurred, because Fyodor was a terrible father to Mitya. And at the very beginning of the book, which is so easy to forget about because Dostoevsky like mentions it twice and then just never goes back to it, there is talk about how Mitya essentially was raised by a surrogate caretaker because Fyodor abandoned him and did not take proper care of him. And I think it mentions that for some of the other brothers too. I'm not fully remembering. So that happens, and then Fyodor is also keeping a sum of money from Mitya, which is his due. And Fyodor also is trying to steal Mitya's true love from him. And Grushenka, is like kind of a woman of slightly dubious morals, so that's why she actually is pliable by Fyodor. That like totally changed the meaning of this book for me, and I realized like, oh my god, like this is actually about like family, and how like this is why it's titled The Brothers Karamazov, because this really is about, it's not really just like a spooky murder mystery. This is about the wreckage that Fyodor's carelessness has caused, not just in the life of Mitya, but in Ivan. Alyosha is faring better because he, I guess, has found kind of a surrogate father in Zosima, the head monk, and perhaps in God. But even in this defense, it talks about, Mitya was raised by God, meaning that there was nobody there actually present to teach him what was right and wrong. And then Smerdyakov too, like this is the crazy thing about this defense is, Smerdyakov, the hidden fourth Karamazov brother, is actually the one responsible for Fyodor's murder, and that gets confirmed at the end of the novel. So Smerdyakov, this is also totally accurate when applied to him, because Smerdyakov is the child of a rape that Fyodor committed with a mentally challenged girl in the village. So Smerdyakov not only had no father, in fact had to grow up as a servant in the house of his biological father, but he also really had no mother who was mentally present enough to care for him, and he was the child of rape. So this description by the defense lawyer is actually completely accurate, whether you are applying it to Mitya or to Smerdyakov. And so I'm just like, has this book just really been about just like abuse the entire time? It's literally crazy for me. And yeah, such a murder is not a parricide either. No, the murder of such a father cannot be called parricide. Such a murder can be considered parricide only out of prejudice. That is, prejudice in favor of the absent father. These people did nothing for my destiny, my upbringing, my education, nothing to make me better, to make a man out of me. These people did not give me to eat, they did not give me to drink. I lay naked in prison and they did not visit me. Now they have exiled me to penal servitude. I am quits, I owe them nothing now, and I owe nothing to anyone unto ages of ages. They are wicked, and I shall be wicked. They are cruel, and I shall be cruel. That is what he will say, gentlemen of the jury. Conversations on how we create monsters, and specifically how parents beget monsters when they fail to care for their children. Okay, and also I want to talk about the scene at the very end of the trial, and this fucking scene, I have to describe it to you for you to understand, but this is in a chapter called Our Peasants Stood Up. And for context, the peasants of the town despise Mitya, because Mitya is not a perfect victim. He is not a good person to be sitting on the defense stand, because Mitya is not likable. He is not a man of good character. He is a hot mess, and he's always drunk, and he's always getting into fights. And because the peasants of the town perceive him as this person who throws money around like it's nothing, and who doesn't care about the, you know, the like, that he's starting fights in their bars and blah, blah, blah. The peasants perceive all of these things that he does wrong, and because they are so stuck on all the things that he has done wrong, they fail to see that he is innocent in the case of Fyodor Karamazov's murder. And so when it comes time for the jury to deliberate, so it describes like the whole courtroom after hearing the defense lawyer's speech about parricide and how, you know, such a father is not a father at all. Like, the whole courtroom is at ease, and they're like, oh, he just won it. He just won it. It's in the bag. Like, everyone is relaxed. They think Mitya is going to get off. The bell rings, and the jury comes back. And it is specifically one of the officials, the youngest of them all, Dostoevsky says, pronounced loudly and clearly, in the dead silence of the courtroom, yes, guilty. And then it was the same on each point. Guilty, yes, guilty, and that without the least extenuation. This really no one had expected. Almost everyone was certain at least of extenuation. The dead silence of the courtroom remained unbroken. Everyone seemed literally turned to stone, both those who longed for conviction and those who longed for acquittal. But this lasted only for the first moments. Then a terrible chaos broke loose. Many among the male public turned out to be very pleased. Of course they would be pleased, because this is the triumph of patriarchy. It is the triumph of the father has privilege to cause as much wreckage as he wants with impunity. And then the child who acts out in response to that will then get punished for acting out in response. Some men even rubbed their hands with unconcealed joy. The displeased ones seemed crushed. They shrugged, whispered, as if still unable to comprehend it. But my God, what came over our ladies? I thought they might start a riot. At first they seemed not to believe their ears. Then suddenly exclamations were heard all over the courtroom. What's that? What on earth is that? They jumped up from their seats. They must have thought it could all be redone and reversed on the spot. At that moment, Mitya suddenly rose and declares that he is not guilty. And then the very end of the book before the epilogue, he'll get a 20-year, just 4 lines of dialogue with no dialogue tags. He'll get a 20-year taste of the mines, not less. Yes, sir, our peasants stood up for themselves and finished off our Matenka. This happened last November. Okay, so I also want to talk about movies, because I've seen a couple of amazing movies recently. The first one that I want to mention, I actually don't have the dates of these, so I'm just going to put the movie poster on the screen. The first one and I will link them below as well. The first one of these is called Antonia's Line. It's a woman-directed film, I do know that much, and it is literally just about generation after generation after generation of women living in this village, and just about, I don't know, their lives and their relationships to each other. It's an extremely feminist movie, and I think you kind of have to like see it to really get why it is such a feminist movie. I will say it is extremely focused on the women themselves. Like, men do appear in the movie, but it is very focused on women and like women's lives, and specifically in this relatively isolated rural village. And I guess the diversity of those lives that they, screaming children outside, the diversity of those lives that they are able to lead. My God. Hold on. Bro, fuck them kids. I can still hear them even with the door closed. Yeah, it's just about like different generations of women and how they choose to live their lives. I guess maybe it's the diversity of personalities that you get to see and the diversity of different choices, even in such a enclosed like village setting. I don't know. This is one of those that you kind of just have to watch. I will say that this filmmaker is apparently known for her very feminist films. So if you're into that, you should probably check out Antonia's line. Okay, next, and second to last, I want to talk about a movie called 13 by Catherine Hardwicke, who directed the first Twilight movie. This movie, when I chose to watch this, I thought it was just gonna be like a bullshit movie, because film bros on YouTube just, the way that they talk about this is like I don't know, like it's so absurd. And you see this in some of the letterboxed comments where it's like, oh, like when I was 13 I was playing Roblox, like kind of in contrast to the like girls in the film who are really not leading very safe adolescences. Like they're smoking and drinking and having sex and like getting into crime and doing all of this stuff. And to those men, it's like, I want to say, there's nothing wrong with the movie. It's just, you were never a 13-year-old girl and you don't realize that adolescent girls go through this stuff. I think that a lot of people also don't seem to recognize that what 13 is really a narrative about, because it's basically, the premise of the film is 13-year-old girl makes this new kind of like bad influence friend at her school, and then her undergoes a personality change and like starts getting into all this hard shit. It's not just the bad influence friend who like has a broken home, and it seemed fairly obvious to me when I was watching this movie that I was like, well, this isn't really about like teenagers doing all this scandalous stuff that is like intended to, you know, freak out the viewer. What this really is a story about neglect and child neglect. And frankly, I don't think ever seen any piece of media that so well portrays what child neglect can look like. And it's really infuriating to me seeing the letterbox comments that are like saying, oh, like, you know, the main character, she was such a brat and like the mom was just doing her best. And I have to fucking disagree with you guys. I do not think that the mom was just doing her best. There is a really striking scene in this movie that is like mirrored several times throughout the actual runtime. So first there's this scene where the main character goes home and sees that there is a strange child she does not know sleeping in her own bed, and moreover, that child has wet her own bed. And so when the main character gets upset, justifiably, about this, because the mom basically has this thing where she'll just invite tons of random friends and their kids to stay, even though they don't have the space, and just literally give them her children's bed to sleep in. When the child, the main character, gets justifiably upset at this, the mother and her boyfriend get angry at her for being upset that she went to go to bed and saw that a strange child had pissed in her bed. If you think that mom is just doing her best, you are fucking crazy to me. Also very striking to me in this movie was that the mom has so much compassion for every single person that is not her own children. She has so much compassion for all these random friends, endless generosity for all of her friends' kids, and as her daughter, the main character, points out, you're giving them all our food and we are not going to have enough this month. And there's another scene where like the mom and the daughter are fighting, and the mom like avoids conflict with her daughter so much. Like she is so avoidant of it so that she basically will do her utmost to make sure that no conflict ever occurs between them. And the daughter will try to prod her into conflict, and the mother will just shut down and turn away. The daughter is increasingly getting ignored by the mother, and then the daughter finally gets her engaged in a fight, and then immediately after the fight has been terminated, early, the mom immediately after, like in the movie this is immediately after, goes to her boyfriend for comfort, and the boyfriend immediately makes her laugh by, like, playing with this little, like, McDonald's toy. The readiness with which the mother starts giggling and laughing and being flirty with the boyfriend, just completely forgetting the really serious argument that she was having with her daughter, is just genuinely, it makes my blood boil. And then there's another scene later that is between the father, the estranged father, and the son of the family. And the father goes up to the son and says something along the lines of, like, so the father, first of all, is only there for like 5 minutes. But the father goes to the son and is like, please just tell me what you need from me to fix this family. As if that is his very young adolescent son's responsibility. There also is a scene, like, very quickly preceding that, where the father is talking with the daughter, and the father's, like, business phone or whatever keeps ringing, and the daughter is, like, upset about it because she never gets to see her dad, and she had been hoping her dad would take her away from her mother. And the dad is like, well, listen, baby, I'm gonna quit my job for you, and it'll be great, and we'll do all this. And he basically kind of, like, makes it so that his own adolescent daughter has to beg him not to leave his job and do something extraordinarily rash to punish her for wanting more of his love. It is actually fucking insane to me. People were so cruel to both the main character and the bad influence friend in the Letterboxd comments. And I think you guys just seriously, like, don't understand the movie. I think you guys don't have enough empathy for people who come from broken homes. Because I thought that both the main character and Evie were absolutely tragic. It was so hard to watch them do all of this, like, bad stuff. And it wasn't from the perspective of, oh, like, they're ruining themselves and they're such bad people or bad girls. Like, because really what was going on with both of them is they were acting out because they wanted somebody to stop them, especially in the case of the main character. You know, she, who had so much instability at home, wanted to forcibly induce stability through restrictions from her mother. And of course, by the end of the movie, by the time that there is some kind of reconciliation, and she says something along the lines of, it will never be okay, to her mother, because of course she's been escalating and escalating and escalating, and at a certain point in the film, you can see that she realizes that, like, her mother is never going to stop her from escalating even until she kills herself, because the mother cares more about her own feelings. And that was very evident to me from the film. I don't know how other people didn't get that. I highly recommend this movie, and I think that Hardwicke, I know there are tenuous things with filming, like, teenagers, especially with, like kissing people, and I think there were some scenes where they kissed adult actors, but from what I have heard about the actual production, I think that they were very, like, locked in and made sure that everything was as safe as it could possibly be. And I do believe that a teenage girl, 15 or so, actually did help to come up with material for this movie, and it fucking shows. When the end credits hit and Liz Phair's Explain It to Me started playing, I felt like something just, like, click in my mind, and suddenly I was filled with this, like, overwhelming compassion for my own adolescent self. I don't know, it's like the sort of thing that can only happen when you really see yourself reflected back at you, and you realize that, like, other people also understand that pain. And there's something about observing your own pain in that way that makes it so that you can finally move past it and process it. Lastly, I finally understand Lord of the Rings. I think I saw a post a really long time ago that said that Lord of the Rings is one of those things that only really works if you are shown it by somebody that you love. And I had tried to watch The Fellowship so many times. I tried to read the books, I tried, like, and just nothing was working. I tried to watch it on my own so many times. But this time, Victor showed all 3 of the extended editions to me. Not one after the other, but like one at a time. I finally get it. Like, I don't know how it works. I think it's magic. But this time, I was completely locked in. I completely understand what these movies are trying to do. They're masterpieces. I really like The Fellowship and The Return of the King a lot better than The Two Towers. I think I needed a second Trump presidency in order to understand what Lord of the Rings is about. Like, I understand all that stuff that it's trying to talk about like fighting for the good in the world and all of that. I mean, they're gorgeous, first of all. Into the West. When that started playing at the end of The Return of the King, I was gone. I was just like, it has been so long since I have seen a movie that has had me just like in hysterics weeping. What can you see on the horizon? And these films affected me in that way this time. And you know what? They were scary this time around too. Like, I never used to think that, like, the monsters or, like, the Dark Riders or anything were scary, and this time they were fucking terrifying to me. Some of the scariest movie monsters that I've seen for quite some time, actually. Well, I'll try to unspoil this. I really liked how there was a part of this story where they, like, Frodo is attempting to kind of rehabilitate someone from the bad side, from, you know, Sauron's side. You know, like a bad person. He's trying to rehabilitate him. And there's this line of, like, this is in the last movie, so I'll censor it out. But the line that goes where Frodo is begging this person not to kill him after he starts to betray him. He's saying, promised. And then the response from who Frodo betrayed Sam for and kicked Sam away for, and who Frodo trusted over Sam, who was there for him for the beginning, says, lied. It's so fucking insane. It's like giving me the chills. And it's such just a different, like, I feel like modern media puts such an emphasis on, like, oh, the anti-hero and, like, bad guys turned good, and just, like, focusing so much on, like, people's billion reasons that they have for doing terrible things. But Tolkien cares about the people who just automatically do good. Like, people who are just good from the beginning and don't have, like, a tragic, sad backstory and don't have all of these bad things that they've done. Tolkien has an immense interest in just goodness and in, like, preserving goodness and what it looks like when good people fight for good causes against evil. There's also a scene where, I can't remember if it's Merry or Pippin, one of them is trying to tell the other, like, oh, well, you know, like, the Ents don't want to fight, so I guess we can just go home now. And the other one says to him, he says, well, but if we go home now, then eventually there's not going to be a home to come back to anymore because it'll be destroyed. Like, we have to actually keep going and go out and fight for it, or else the Shire won't be there anymore for us. The narratives in these movies about power and the lust for power, and I just, like,
it's such just like an insane breath of fresh air compared to like what you see in the media. I feel like the media rewards like pettiness, dunking on the haters or whatever, and it's very early on in the first movie where you see that scene where Gandalf is trying to say to Bilbo, like, all right, it's time for you to hand the ring over now, and Bilbo immediately is just like, he goes on the defensive immediately, and he's like, oh, you're just jealous that it was given to me instead of you, like, I always knew you didn't like me, and like, just like doing all that stuff, and it's just like exploring these concepts of like how people can become corrupted by power and wealth that you just don't see anymore. And oh, I loved like the stuff about like different people being too cowardly to join in the fight. One of the kings, I forget which one it is, but the cowardly king, the one who is eventually suicidal, and tries to burn his own son alive. He is like just pigging out at the dinner table, and either Merry or Pippin, I forget which, is just singing, and like the look on his face as he is like the fool singing for this king's entertainment because he knows his friends are fighting for their life. Crazy. Fucking crazy. The scene where Gandalf goes to see Saruman in the first movie, and he's like, oh, like, you know, Sauron is like building an army and we have to go fight against him, and Saruman is just like, well, now's the time to join Sauron. It's, you know, it's pointless to resist after all. You know, you got to get on the right side while there's still time. And just like, I loved these movies' exploration of cowardice and all of the different things that cowardice looks like. And especially in the first movie, there's another example of this is Boromir, and how they're all crying about, and Boromir arguing with Aragorn, I think, and he says, like, come on, have a little pity, let them cry a little bit, like, let's just take a break. And Aragorn says, no, we need to keep going or else the bad guys are going to catch us, basically. And it's such an amazing illustration of like what true compassion looks like, because sometimes true compassion means being an asshole in the moment, and sometimes being the good guy means being an asshole in the moment, whereas being a coward and always putting your own like precious fine feelings above everything else, like Tolkien does an amazing job illustrating what that looks like and how that is different from true bravery and true goodness. There are so many other things I could say about the amazing sets, about I am no man and that line, and how absolutely metal that is when it's delivered in the movie. The dedication and sincerity with which everybody approached these because they knew that there was something very special and important about them. There's so much more I could say. Everybody knows why Lord of the Rings is so good. I think that the biggest reason that I love it is because it is a celebration of defending goodness from evil and the triumph of goodness over evil. And I suppose that alongside the Brothers Karamazov, that this was just like the perfect time for me to like really take those things in, really like kind of start to flesh out what I think my view is of like what being a good person actually looks like. I guess it just felt like this is the time to do that. Victor and I, we drew Lord of the Rings out of our movie jar that we pick random movies from, so maybe it was fate. Freudian slip. Maybe it was fate. I don't know. I think it maybe if you are looking for something to help you like cope with it all, Lord of the Rings and Brothers Karamazov, that has been what has helped me to kind of like organize how I'm feeling a little bit, and I guess it just helps to see something where, in the case of Lord of the Rings, it helps to see something where the good guys win. But if the good guys are to win, then I think there needs to be a change in our cynicism and in our preference of anti-heroes over people who are just heroes. That is all I have for you today. This ended up being way longer than I thought it was going to be, even though I didn't really talk about that many things. Let me know what you thought of all of this, if you have any questions. And yeah, I will see you next time, possibly with something a little bit different. Bye.
Into the world of night, through shadows fall.